At 6:14 a.m., a hunter dialed 911 from the edge of Red Hollow Ridge. His voice shook as he said he'd found something that shouldn't be there. Not bones. Not a body. A truth. A truth. Within hours, sirens cut through a town that had spent 22 years pretending for kids simply got lost. That single phone call didn't. Just before we dive into this chilling story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for the full investigation. But first, to understand why that phone call mattered, we have to go back to a Tennessee summer that felt endless, slow, and safe, back before Red Hollow had a name. People whispered. In July of 2003, this was a place families trusted, a place you took your kids when you wanted them away from noise, from trouble, from the world. Red Hollow Ridge sat just outside Scott County, wrapped in trees so thick the sun barely touched the ground by noon. Locals said the woods had a way of swallowing sound. You could shout, and your own voice wouldn't come back. But in 2003, that wasn't fear. That was peace. That summer was hot. The kind of heat that sticks to your skin even after dark. Teenagers chased their last sense of freedom before school, before work, before adulthood closed in. For Josh Rayburn, 19 and restless, the woods meant escape. For his younger brother Ryan, it meant proving he wasn't a kid anymore. And for their cousins, Amy and Caleb, Red Hollow was supposed to be nothing more than a memory. Fotos. Few laughs. A story they'd tell later. Their families watched them pack cheap tents, old coolers, and a single flip phone that barely held signal. No one was worried. People had camped there for generations. Hunters, Boy Scouts, church groups. Red Hollow didn't. T-Hurt and Yuan. When the SUV pulled away that afternoon, nobody stood at the window wondering if this was the last time they'd see those faces. There were no arguments, no threats, no shadows trailing behind them. Just for kids heading into the trees, confident they'd be back by Sunday. That's the image to hold on to. Sunshine on windshields, laughter through open windows. The belief that bad things happen somewhere else, to someone else. Because everything that follows only works if you remember how ordinary this felt. How safe it seemed. How completely wrong everyone was. Josh Rayburn drove always. He knew those back roads. The turns where the pavement cracked. The spots where radio stations died. Ryan rode shotgun, feet on the dash, arguing about music. Amy and Caleb sat in the back, cooler between them, already talking about starting a fire before dark. It was supposed to be simple. Park the SUV, pitch the tents, spend 2 nights telling stories and sleeping under the stars. They reached the Red Hollow trailhead just before dusk. That's where the pavement ended and the woods began. Later, investigators would return to this exact spot, measuring tire marks, photographing leaves, zooming in on details no one noticed that day. But at the time, it was just a place to stop the car. What we know comes from fragments. From a store receipt showing ice and marshmallows. From a brief call Ryan made to a friend, complaining about the bugs. From a voicemail Josh left for his mother, joking that the signal was terrible and they be home soon. That voicemail would be replayed dozens of times after they vanished, each laugh examined like evidence. Search crews later found the campsite half-built. One tent, still folded. Stakes pushed into the ground, but never finished. A fire ring, stacked with rocks. Unlit. It told investigators something interrupted them early. Not a storm. Not darkness. Something that made for teenagers stop what they were doing at the same moment. Then there was the phone. Josh's flip phone was found near the site. Battery dead. Antenna snapped. Cell records showed one last signal ping. Weakened brief. Bouncing off a tower miles away. After that, silence. No calls. No texts. No goodbye. By Sunday night, the families were calling each other. By Monday morning, they were calling police. Officers walked the trail. They followed footprints that vanished into mud and leaves. By midweek, helicopters circled overhead. Dogs tracked scents that led nowhere. Every hour without answers turned confusion into fear. The SUV was locked. Keys were gone. There were no bloodstains. No signs of a fight. No note. For detectives, that was the first impossible question. How do 4 people disappear from the same place without leaving behind even one clear mistake? That weekend didn't end on Sunday. It stretched on for years. And the more investigators looked back at those final hours, the more it became clear. Whatever happened to Red Hollow wasn't random. It was Tillabor. And it started the moment they stepped out of that SUV. Red Hollow Ridge looks ordinary on a map. Just another stretch of Tennessee woodland, folded into hills and cut by old trails. But maps don't show reputation, and they don't show memory. Ask anyone who grew up near Red Hollow, and they'll tell you the same thing. You don't camp deep there. You don't wander after dark. And if you hear something moving that shouldn't be, you leave it alone. Long before the cousins vanished, the ridge carried stories. Prohibition-era tunnels, carved into limestone. Moonshiners hiding barrels underground. Sections of land sold and resold without clear records. Hunters talked about sinkholes that opened overnight. Old-timers talked about paths that seemed to move, leading you in circles until daylight broke the spell. None of it was written down. That's how fear survives. Quietly, detectives later studied the terrain like a suspect. Steep graves, dense brush, natural blind spots where sound dies fast. You could stand 20 feet away from someone and never hear them call your name. For search teams, that geography mattered. It explained why helicopters saw nothing, why dogs lost trails. Red Hollow didn't just hide things. It assayed them. Locals were interviewed early on. Most were cooperative. Some weren't. Doors stayed shut. Names were offered and quickly withdrawn. Investigators noticed a pattern. People knew pieces of the land. Old entrances, old fences, old warnings, passed down like family heirlooms, but no one wanted to say too much. That reluctance wasn't proof of guilt. It was proof of history. Red Hollow had always been a place where you minded your business, where survival meant knowing when not to ask questions. For the families of the missing cousins, that silence was worse than hostility. It meant answers were nearby, locked behind smiles and shrugs. Law enforcement logged every detail. Abandoned hunting cabins, caves sealed with rusted gates, old property lines that no longer existed on paper. Nothing pointed directly to what happened in 2003, but everything pointed to one reality. This wasn't a place where accidents were easy to untangle. By the end of the first week, fear had replaced hope. Not because the woods were dangerous on their own, but because someone who understood this place might have used it exactly the way it was designed, to keep secrets and to keep them buried. The search for the four cousins began the way most do. Fast, loud, full of confidence. Local deputies arrived first, followed by state troopers, volunteer fire crews, and neighbors who knew the trails by heart. Everyone believed the same thing. Someone had twisted an ankle. Someone was lost. This would end with hugs and tears before the week was over. Search grids were drawn. K-9 units were deployed at dawn. Helicopters swept the ridge, their rotors beating the air flat as crews scanned for color. Movement, anything out of place. Detectives focused on logic. If you're lost, you walk downhill. If you're hurt, you stay close to camp. Red Hollow ignored both rules. Dogs caught scents near the campsite, then stopped. Handlers tried again, adjusting angles, starting points, wind direction. Some result. The trail dissolved. For investigators, that was troubling. Human scent, docente hustbanis. It has to be disrupted. B. Weather. B. Water. Or by intention. Evidence teams. Documented everything. Boot impressions that couldn't be matched. A crushed soda can that didn't belong to the group. Bits of fabric snagged on briars, later ruled out. Each find brought excitement. Each explanation brought disappointment. The hours piled up, and wheat thinned out. By the third day, the tone changed. Searchers stopped talking about rescue and started talking about recovery. Commanders expanded the perimeter, pushing deeper into terrain few had ever entered. Some volunteers quit. Others pushed harder, driven by a sense that quitting felt like betrayal. Families waited near the trailhead, watching every helicopter land, studying every expression for clues they didn't want to hear. Detectives updated them carefully. No panic, no promises, just facts. Still, one question hung over every briefing. How do four people disappear together without leaving behind the thing all searches depend on? A mistake. By the end of the second week, the search scaled down. Not officially over. Just quieter. Hope thinned, and to ritual. Flyers went up. Tips came in. None held. Red Hollow had given nothing back. And for investigators, that silence wasn't empty. It was heavy. It suggested planning, familiarity, and a truth no one was ready to say out loud yet. This wasn't a case the woods had swallowed. This was a case someone had hidden inside them. By the 4th week, Red Hollow was quiet again. The helicopters were gone. The search tapes came down, and the missing persons board inside the sheriff's office stopped changing. For investigators, this was the moment that defined the case. Not the day the cousins vanished, the day there was nothing left to check. Detectives reviewed every log, every GPS track from search teams, every K9 report. The conclusion was unsettling. The area had been covered thoroughly. If the cousins were injured, they should have been found. If they'd wandered, something would have surfaced. But Red Hollow offered no evidence of panic, no discarded gear, no signs of survival. It was as if the trail ended cleanly on purpose. The case shifted classification. Missing, presumed endangered, not declared criminal, but no longer treated as a rescue. That distinction mattered. It changed funding. It changed manpower. It changed how long officers could justify staying in the woods. Instead of responding to new calls, investigators began building timelines instead of search grids. Who knew the cousins were camping? Who saw the SUV arrive? Who was hunting that weekend? Leads came fast at first. A suspicious truck. A campfire scene at a distance. A report of yelling after dark. Each tip was examined. Each one collapsed under scrutiny. The families felt the shift immediately. Fewer calls. Shorter updates. Words like ongoing and active, used carefully, strategically. In reality, the case was stalled, not abandoned, but frozen in place. Case files grew thick. Polaroids faded. Cassette interviews were boxed and labeled. Detectives moved on, but the file stayed close. Every few months, someone reopened it, hoping time had changed the answer. It never did. Years passed. Parents, I gave. Ryan would have graduated. Amy would have married. Caleb would have voted for the first time. Those milestones became part of the case record, not because they were evidence, but because they measured loss. The absence of bodies created a legal shadow. No crime scene. No charis. No suspects. Without proof of death, justice had nowhere to land. Red Hollow became shorthand within the department. A reminder that some cases don't they fail loudly, they fade. By the 10th year, the file was officially labeled cold. And with that single word, the mystery took on a life of its own. Cold didn't mean inactive. It meant careful. Detectives turned outward, testing theories that didn't require bodies to exist. Voluntary disappearance was discussed, then dismissed. For teenagers don't erase themselves at once. They don't leave their car, their supplies, their lives behind. Accidents came next. A fall, a hidden drop. Underground water. Geologists were consulted. Sinkholes were mapped. The terrain was unforgiving, but not impossible. The theory collapsed under one simple fact. There was no sign of impact. No broken gear. No concentrated scent. Accidents leave chaos. Red Hollow showed control. Then came people. Hunters with criminal records. A drifter seen weeks earlier. A property owner who kept to himself. Background checks were run. Alibis were tested. One suspect failed the polygraph. Another passed and still stayed under suspicion. Detectives knew the danger here. Once a community begins to search for a face, logic could be replaced by fear. Resources thinned. Leads grew weaker. Tips started repeating themselves. Stories changed with each retelling. Some were sincere, others weren't. Red Hollow attracted speculation like a magnet. Treasure hunters, amateur sleuths, people convinced the truth was being hidden on purpose. Inside the department, pressure built. Without evidence, every theory was fragile. Younger detectives wanted to push harder. Veterans urged patience. The file passed hands. Each transfer risked in context, nuance, memory. Investigators fought that decay the best way they knew how. Detailed notes, timelines, warnings written in the margins about what not to assume. The most damaging false trail came with certainty. An anonymous letter claiming knowledge, names, coordinates. Search teams returned to the ridge, digging where they were told. Nothing was found. The letter vanished as quickly as it appeared. Hope took another hit. By year 15, the case stopped being about solving. It became about endurance, keeping facts clean, preventing contamination, waiting for something outside the original investigation to break the stalemate that fractury between what detectives wanted and what the case allowed defined Red Hollow for decades. It wasn't the lack of effort that kept the truth hidden. It was the absence of one thing. A mistake, and whoever took the cousins knew exactly how to avoid making one dot. As years passed, Red Hollow stopped being just a case. It became a story people told differently depending on who was listening. Officially, detectives stuck to facts. Unofficially, the town filled in the silence. Legends grew where evidence failed. And in a place like Red Hollow, stories travel faster than truth. Locals talked about lights moving through the trees at night, about engines heard where no roads existed, about gunshots that echoed once and never again. Most of these accounts came late, after the searches ended, after fear had time to ferment. Detectives logged them anyway. Patterns matter, even when details don't. What stood out wasn't what people claimed to see, it was when they chose to see it. Several reports clustered around the same stretch of ridge, an area tied to old property lines and forgotten access points. When investigators pushed back into that zone years later, they found signs of human activity that predated the disappearance. Fire pits, scrap, metal, timber cuts inconsistent with hunting. Red Hollow had been used, quietly, purposefully. The deeper detectives dug into local history. The stranger the picture became. Records showed parcels bought and sold under shell names, trails that appeared on no official map. Elder residents mentioned tunnels without knowing exactly where they led, not myths. Infrastructure, built to move things unseen. These whispers didn't name a killer, they named opportunity. Someone who knew Red Hollow wasn't a Fredo Fitaliano. Someone who understood which paths swallowed sound, which slopes erased prints, which entrances no one would question. For families, rumors were poison. Each new theory reopened wounds without closing any. Law enforcement made a choice. Separate fact from folklore. Use the stories not as conclusions, but as direction. By the 20th year, Red Hollow had become both a crime scene and a character. A place capable of hiding more than evidence, capable of shaping behavior. Detectives stopped asking what the woods did. They started asking who used the woods as a tool. That shift didn't solve the case, but it prepared the ground for something the original investigation never had. Context, and context changes everything when science finally catches up. In 2003, evidence had limits. DNA testing was slow, selective, and expensive. Touch DNA was barely understood. Cell phone data came in blocks, not maps. Surveillance cameras were rare, grainy, and often overwritten. Investigators worked with what they had, and they made no major mistakes. But time would expose what they couldn't see. The Red Hollow evidence sat sealed for years. Tents, clothing fibers, the damaged flip phone, soil samples, labeled and logged. To the untrained eye, it was dead weight. To modern investigators, it was a time capsule. When the cold case unit reopened the file in the early 2020s, the first step wasn't interviews. It was inventory. Every item was re-examined under new standards. Gloves were changed between each piece. Chain of custody confirmed. No shortcuts. Cold cases are won in labs, not interrogations. Forensic specialists focused on what was overlooked, not what failed. Microscopic material on tent fabric, degraded skin cells on zipper poles, residue inside the phone casing. In 2003, those details meant nothing. In 2024, they could mean everything. Cell data was reprocessed using modern mapping. 1 week signal from that final night was replotted, layered against terrain models and tower coverage. The margin of error shrank. A general area became a corridor. A corridor became a path. This wasn't a breakthrough yet. No. Arrests. No. Namis. Hust movement. The case felt alive again. Investigators noticed something else. The old assumptions no longer held. The idea that there was no crime scene began to crack. Evidence doesn't disappear. It waits for the right lens. The families were notified carefully. No promises. Just progress. After 2 decades of stillness. Even that mattered. Red Hollow hadn't changed, but the tools had. And somewhere in that sealed room, inside bags untouched since 2003, the truth was no longer hiding. It was finally visible. They called didn't come from law enforcement. It came from a man who knew the woods too well to ignore what he'd seen. A licensed hunter, moving off the marked trail to track a wounded deer, noticed the ground dip in a way it hadn't the season before. exposed roots, fresh collapse. Red Hollow doesn't give up the earth easily, and when it does, there's usually a reason. He pushed aside leaves and saw something pale against the dirt. Not bone, at first glance. Tool. Clean. When he dug with his hands, they hit fabric rotting, folded, buried. He backed away and called 911. That choice changed the case, forever. Investigators sealed the area within hours. Forensic teams worked carefully, widening the dig inch by inch. What they uncovered wasn't a single grave. It was a concealment site. Partial remains. Personal items. Camping gear compacted together as if gathered quickly, then hidden with intention. Identification took weeks. The remains didn't give up names easily, but context spoke. Clothing matched descriptions from 2003. Serial numbers matched the purchase receipts. 4 people hadn't vanished. They'd been placed deliberately. This discovery shattered the old narrative. Red Hollow hadn't swallowed the cousins. Someone used the land to erase them. Detectives returned to earlier timelines and noticed what they'd missed. That stretch of ridge sat near historical access points tied to tunnel entrances recorded decades earlier. The hunters' find rewrote 22 years of assumptions. The absence of panic, the missing tracks, the locked vehicle. All of it pointed in one direction now. Control, planning, familiarity. The emotional impact hit fast. Families were notified in person. Answers arrived hand in hand with grief. Closure, in its cruelest form. This was the true midpoint of the case. Not resolution, revelation. Proof that the mystery was never accidental, and proof that whoever did this believed the earth itself would protect them. That belief didn't account for time. Or for chance. Or for one man stepping slightly off the trail. Once the remains were found, Red Hollow changed status. No longer search territory. Crime scene. The ridge was locked down in sections, surveyed with tools unavailable in 2003. Ground-penetrating radar mapped voids beneath the soil, revealing something investigators had only heard rumors about. A network, not natural, man-made. These tunnels weren't random. They followed property boundaries that no longer existed, cutting beneath roots, roads, and rock. Built for concealment, built to move unseen. Their age varied. Some dated back nearly a century. Others had been reinforced much later. Someone had been maintaining them. Inside the tunnels, investigators found a second crime scene. Drag marks preserved in clay. Fibers consistent with the tent fabric. Shoe impressions, too degraded to match, but clear enough to show pattern. 4 individuals had been moved underground, controlled, directed. This explained what baffled early searches. Dogs losing scent, helicopters seeing nothing, sound disappearing. Red Hollow wasn't just vertical, it was hollow in the most literal sense. Forensic teams treated the tunnels as both environment and weapon. The killer didn't need restraints or chaos. The land did the work. That level of confidence narrowed the suspect pool dramatically. This wasn't a passing stranger. This was someone local. Someone patient. Someone who understood the ridge the way engineers understand blueprints. Historical records. Tied tunnel access points to a handful of properties. Some abandoned. Some still occupied. Investigators began quiet surveillance. Not to accuse, but to observe. Behavior reveals what words hide. The tunnels also revealed something else. Time. Evidence preserved from earlier decades. Tools. Food wrappers. Recent footprints on older paths. Red Hollow hadn't been abandoned after 2003. It had been used. This chapter of the investigation. Reframed. Motive. The crime wasn't this spontaneous. It was facilitated by infrastructure and habit. The cousins didn't stumble into danger. They crossed into territory someone believed they controlled. With this understanding, detectives finally had leverage. Location, method, opportunity. 3 pillars that hadn't existed before. The case moved forward again, not with fear this time, but with precision. And beneath Red Hollow Ridge, the past had finally stopped hiding. The tunnels gave the case direction. The lab gave it teeth. Once the scene was secured, forensic teams focused on the smallest details, the kind killers trust time to erase. Touch DNA lifted from corroded tent poles, skin cells trapped in rust, biological material transferred without anyone realizing it ever happened. In 2003, none of this mattered. By 2024, it mattered more than anything. Profiles were built carefully, conservatively, partial matches. At first, inconclusive on their own, powerful in combination. Investigators entered the profiles into CODIS. No direct hits. That silence didn't stop the process. It triggered the next step. Forensic genetic genealogy expanded the search outward instead of inward. Distant relatives. Shared markers. Family trees built branch by branch. Analysts worked backwards. Not to a suspect, but to a history. This wasn't about who had motive in 2003. It was about who existed near Red Hollow and vanished from scrutiny. Afterward, one lineage stood out. Quietly, consistently. Cluster of relatives tied to property near the ridge. Records showed temporary relocations. Name variations. Gaps where there shouldn't have been any. The profile sharpened. Not a drifter. Not a tourist. A local who stayed local, just well out of view. Investigators layered this against tunnel access maps, salary analysis, and historical maintenance reports. Paths overlapped. Timelines aligned. It still wasn't enough to arrest anyone. It was enough to know where to look. Surveillance followed. Discarded items were collected legally. A coffee cup. Glove. Nothing dramatic. Nothing rushed. The comparison took days, then minutes. The match came back definitive. 22 years collapsed into one lab report. For detectives, this wasn't triumph. It was confirmation. The science didn't create the truth. It revealed it. The suspect's name went on paper for the first time, and immediately, the weight of it was felt. Because this wasn't a stranger pulled from obscurity. This was someone everyone had missed. The name changed the room. Detectives looked at each other, checking reactions. Not because they were shocked by guilt, but because of recognition. This wasn't an outsider. This was a man known to the community, known to law enforcement, known to Red Hollow. He wasn't on any old suspect list. He didn't need to be. His alibi had never raised concern. His access had never been questioned. He fit the shape of the town too well to stand out. The betrayal cut deep. Someone who understood procedure. Someone who understood how cases stall. How evidence waits. How patience outlasts urgency. That knowledge wasn't coincidence. It was advantage. Investigators revisited every early decision. Every moment where trust had filled a gap evidence couldn't. Nothing illegal. Nothing negligent. Just a reminder that authority, when unchallenged, becomes invisible. The file was updated. Warrants drafted. Steps rehearsed. There was no rush now. Only certainty. Rehearsed. There was no rush now. Only certainty. For the families, the name was delivered softly, carefully. Justice doesn't land all at once. It arrives in pieces, and the heaviest piece is understanding who walked free for decades, while for lives stayed, buried. The case hadn't reached its end, but the final road was clear, and the community of Red Hollow was about to learn that the truth hadn't been far away. It had been wearing a familiar face. The morning of the arrest was quiet. Too quiet for a town like Red Hollow. News didn't leak. Rumors didn't spread. Detectives wanted control, precision, and a chance to preserve every detail for prosecution. When the suspect stepped into handcuffs, the town felt a tremor. Not just because a killer was caught, but because it was someone they had trusted. Someone who had smiled, waved, and walked the same streets for 22 years without suspicion. Officers moved methodically. Statements were taken. Evidence secured. The community's disbelief rippled outward. Families cried. Neighbors whispered. And reporters arrived with cameras ready. The phrase, "arrest shocks the community," wasn't a headline. It was the truth. Detectives briefed the families first. Carefully. Names, dates, and timelines. Confirmed. The relief of knowing the case had a lead collided with the horror of understanding the scale of betrayal. 4 teenagers hadn't vanished. They'd been hidden. The land had helped. The person had planned. The years hadn't softened the impact. Investigators released limited details to the press. The rest remained confidential. Every confession, every corroboration, and every forensic match had to be handled with precision. One slip, one misstatement, could compromise decades of work. Inside the department, the case became a study in patience. The arrest wasn't the end. It was the bridge between cold files and courtroom strategy. The evidence, meticulously preserved for 22 years, now had the context to work. Public reaction varied. Shock, rage, relief, gratitude toward law enforcement who had never given up, and questions about how someone could operate so close for so long. Detectives answered some. Others remained unspoken. Red Hollow had been silent for decades, and part of its power remained in that silence. By nightfall, the town felt different. The woods didn't seem smaller, but the shadows had names, and the people who walked those streets knew that nothing, not even time, could hide the truth forever. The legal process began swiftly but carefully. The suspect was arraigned on multiple counts. The evidence, decades in the making, was ready. DNA, tunneled documentation, eyewitness accounts, and timelines converged. No piece could be dismissed. Courtroom strategy balanced authority with sensitivity. Prosecutors emphasized the meticulous planning behind the crime. Defense lawyers attempted to challenge the chain of custody, but every procedure had been recorded, every sample preserved. 22 years of attention to detail left no holes. Family members attended hearings with quiet determination. Each testimony was a mix of grief and relief. Parents recounted the days after the disappearance. Siblings spoke about lost milestones. Every word reminded the court of the human lives that had been hidden for too long. Investigators testified. They described the original searches, the lost trails, the discovery of tunnels, the breakthrough through genetic genealogy. The courtroom became a stage for decades of persistence and science, proving that even the oldest cold case can be solved with modern tools and unwavering dedication. When the jury reached its verdict, the room held its breath. Guilty. The word landed like a hammer. Decades of silence, fear, and speculation were met with finality. Justice, delayed but not denied, had arrived. For the community, closure was bittersweet. Relief mingled with the haunting reality that the lives lost could never be fully restored. Red Hollow Ridge would always carry memories of tragedy, but it now also held the story of perseverance. Law enforcement filed detailed reports. Families received personal briefings. Media coverage framed the story as a testament to patience, innovation, and ethical policing. Other investigators used the case as a model for cold cases nationwide, proving that methodical work, community collaboration, and modern forensic science can break the longest silences. In the end, Red Hollow Ridge stood quiet once more. But this time the silence was not mystery, it was memory. Memory of 4 teenagers, lost but finally acknowledged. Memory of detectives who refused to let time win. Memory of a town that learned the truth cannot be buried forever. The case closed. The woods remained. The lessons endured. And Red Hollow, though scarred, finally had names to its shadows. After the verdict, the spotlight shifted from the suspect to the families. For over 2 decades, they had carried unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and an unbearable uncertainty. Each parent, sibling, and cousin faced a new kind of confrontation. The reality of the past mingled with the relief of truth. Interviews captured their voices cautiously, respectful of trauma. One mother spoke softly about the first week of searches, the hope that burned brighter than reason. A father reflected on anniversaries marked by absence, birthdays that passed in silence, and the daily ache of not knowing. The cousins who survived the fear of rumor and speculation shared their fear, frustration, and resilience. Despite the heartbreak, gratitude surfaced. They thanked law enforcement for never giving up, for maintaining files with precision, for revisiting evidence long after others had moved on. In their eyes, the decades of silence had finally yielded justice and acknowledgement of the lives lost. These reflections added a crucial human layer to the case. The public often fixates on the arrest, the tunnels, the DNA, but the family's stories reminded viewers and investigators alike why cold cases demand attention. The impact of loss is measured in years, not minutes. Counselors worked with the families to navigate media attention, ensuring that emotional exposure didn't re-traumatize. Community vigils honored the missing cousins, combining grief with the acknowledgement that justice, while delayed, had arrived. The family's perspectives underscored a timeless lesson. Closure isn't a moment, it's a process. It comes in stages: truth, recognition, acceptance. And for Red Hollow, the process had finally begun. Red Hollow's case became a benchmark in modern investigative strategy. Forensic genetic genealogy had transformed the investigation, highlighting the power of DNA and ancestry, mapping to solve decades-old mysteries. What was once theoretical became decisive. Investigators documented every step. Trace evidence, previously dismissed, now carried enormous weight. Clothing fibers, soil residues, and preserved organic material were analyzed using tools unavailable in 2003. Each microscopic finding contributed to the narrative of controlled disappearance. The tunnels revealed an often overlooked element: environmental manipulation. Understanding how a suspect could use terrain strategically became a core lesson for cold case units nationwide. Not every disappearance is random. Some are engineered, with the land itself as an accomplice. Law enforcement also emphasized community engagement. Anonymous tips, local history, and interviews with residents had repeatedly pointed toward key areas, even if dismissed at the time. The message was clear. Every fragment matters. No lead is too small. Training programs incorporated Red Hollow into curricula, illustrating how patience, persistence, and evolving technology intersect. Detectives learned to balance initial assumptions with open-minded review decades later. False trails, while frustrating, became teaching points rather than failures. Red Hollow proved that cold cases are living entities. They adapt as technology improves, as databases expand, and as investigators revisit old evidence. It also demonstrated the ethical responsibility to families. Transparency, empathy, and methodical communication are as crucial as DNA and fingerprint analysis. Ultimately, Red Hollow's lessons reinforced the truth. Justice delayed does not mean justice denied. Time may bury evidence, but it cannot erase human determination. 2 decades after the disappearance, Red Hollow Ridge remains a site of both reflection and remembrance. Memorials honor the cousins, marking the location near the ridge where they were last seen. Trees planted, plaques installed, and a small annual ceremony commemorate lives lost and the triumph of perseverance. The community has changed. Residents who once whispered about Red Hollow now speak openly, sharing stories of courage, resilience, and vigilance. Children hear not only about the tragedy, but also about the importance of awareness, safety, and the enduring work of law enforcement. Detectives continue to visit Red Hollow on anniversaries, not for investigations, but to reflect, train, and honor the families who never gave up. The site has become a case study for new officers, illustrating the value of patience, scientific innovation, and meticulous record-keeping. Red Hollow has also inspired media coverage and educational content. Documentaries, podcasts, and academic studies analyze the case, highlighting techniques from genetic genealogy to tunnel mapping. Each retelling reinforces the message: even the coldest case can be solved with diligence, expertise, and collaboration. The families have found ways to cope and remember. Some establish scholarships in the cousins' names. Others work in advocacy for missing persons and support groups, channeling grief into prevention and awareness. Their stories amplify the importance of never forgetting. The ridge itself, once silent and foreboding, now carries dual significance. It's a reminder of loss, yes, but also of truth revealed and justice achieved. Visitors tread carefully, understanding that this is more than a landscape. It's a testament to decades of human persistence. Both in tragedy and resolution, in Red Hollow, silence no longer hides secrets. It honors lessons learned, justice earned, and memories preserved. The past, though painful, has shaped a community resilient enough to confront it. And so, Red Hollow stands today, not as a marker of failure, but as a symbol of perseverance, closure, and the enduring belief that truth cannot be buried forever. The case may be closed, the investigation may be complete, but Red Hollow's legacy continues to teach, warn, and inspire.